To open or not to open? That is the question. 'Tis nobler to stay open or to not. I forget how the rest of the thing goes. But it's a question that a lot of people have been asking us. When you guys going to open? Because, the governor has now said that we can have gatherings of up to 25% capacity, which for us would be like, I think, about 400, 500 people or so. And so we could do that. Other churches are opening. Some are anyways. And the COVID rate is dropping. And so folks are saying, why aren't you opening? Some folks, get a little frustrated. My mom's church is opening. My brother's church is opening. But why aren't you guys opening? And it's never intended like this, but it can start to feel almost like peer pressure. Like in 6th grade when someone's trying to get you to smoke. Come on, just try it. Everyone else is doing it. Why are you? It's chicken. What is Woodland Hills chicken? Bark, Woodland Hills. Chicken won't open up. Why don't you just choose faith over fear? Now, if you've worked out that policy consistently, you'd be as reckless as can be in the name of faith. But so here's the thing. Our board and our staff, we have been really seriously talking about this, going back and forth on it and praying over it. And now they've asked me to share with all of you why the leadership of Woodland Hills Church, feels, right now at least, called to resist the trend to reopen. And I know this is a topic which, I just made light of it, but in fact, there's a lot of emotion involved in this, not just with church, but with, schools and bars and restaurants and all the rest. There's a lot of, because there's different perspectives you can have on this, and I don't think everyone will agree with me and with the leadership of Woodland Hills Church, and that's fine, and we understand that. But just try to keep an open mind as we just sort of share why we here at Woodland Hills don't feel like we should be opening just yet. And I want to make it clear that this is just about what the leadership of Woodland Hills Church believes about Woodland Hills, what God's calling Woodland Hills to do. And it's not about any other churches. Everyone's got to call the shots on their own, and we bless them, and they don't have to agree with us. But this is why we feel called to go in this direction. I'll start by just reminding you of a sermon I gave last week on how love fulfills the whole law. If you didn't hear that message and yet you consider Woodland Hills part of your community, I encourage you to listen to that message, because I pulled kind of condensed into one 40-minute segment all the stuff about the centrality of love, and it is the most fundamental, I'd say the most fundamental teaching point of our community. The bullseye that we want to be shooting for and living for is to be living in love as Christ loved us and gave his life for us. It's why our slogan is learning to love together. It's so simple, and yet it's so profound, because that is, in the end, all that we are called to do. We saw last week that the whole law and the prophets are summed up, Jesus says, when we love the Lord our God with all of our heart and mind and soul, and we love our neighbor as ourselves. And he says, on this hang all the law and the prophets. He was asked, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, well, there's 2 that I got to give you. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do this, everything else you need to do will be fulfilled. Paul drives us home in 1 Corinthians 13 that, you can have gifts of tongues and move mountains with your faith and have all knowledge and understand all mysteries. But if you don't have love, it's worthless. And what he's saying there is that love is the one value giver in the kingdom. Love is the one thing that makes any activity a distinctly kingdom activity. And so you can have the most impressive activity in the world, but if it's not done for love, out of love, for the sake of love, then it's, from a kingdom perspective, altogether worthless. If you do this, living in love like this, then everything else you need to do will be gotten down. But if you don't do this, if we miss this bullseye, it doesn't matter what else we do, whoever else we impress, it doesn't matter. It's altogether worthless from a kingdom perspective. So this is the bullseye of the kingdom that we're never to take our eye off of. And it's important to remember what love is. Talked about this last week as well. Love is defined by the Bible. The kind of love that we're called to live in is defined by pointing us to the cross. Here's how we know what love is, John says. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, so also we should lay down our life for one another. So the cross reveals the kind of love that God is, and it reveals the kind of love that we are to be always aspiring towards. This is the very definition of what it is to be godly. Here's how we are supposed to be like God in terms of how we love. Loving like the rain falls, loving like the sun shines, loving indiscriminately, like Abba Father does. This is the kind of love that's other-oriented. In Philippians 2:4, Paul tells us to put others' interests above our own. So this is the kind of love that esteems the interest, the welfare, the well-being of others ahead of our own. This is the kind of love that leads us to follow Jesus' example of going out of our way to care for the least of these, caring for the most vulnerable, caring for those who are forgotten, caring for those who are trampled on, caring for those who are cast aside, caring for those who maybe others, it's not on their radar screen to care for them. We're to go out of our way to care for them. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16:14 that this is to characterize everything we do. Let all that you do be done in love. So if all that we do is to be done in love, then this decision about whether to open or not should be done in love, cross-like love, self-sacrificial love, other-oriented love. Janice Rawlings, our executive pastor, who this church is indebted to in more ways than you could imagine, she, as well as some other pastors, as she listened to the sermon last week, she felt that this should completely reframe this question of reopening, at least reframe the way it's usually asked, the way we usually kind of proceed with this. So here's the deal. Now we have the legal right to gather together. That's true. We can reopen if we want to. But notice that when I say we can reopen if we want to, it's not all of us. It's all of us who are healthy enough to not have to worry too much about the risk of gathering together in groups of people. There is a risk there. I don't care how cautious you are. There's somewhat of a risk. But if you're healthy and you don't have any underlying conditions, you're okay. You might be okay with that. But the we does not include people who have got underlying conditions, people for whom contracting this virus could be absolutely lethal. That could be true of anybody, but they're at a higher risk of this. Of course, they're free to come. They could come, but then if they were to come, they'd be at a higher risk. So the decision for us to open is not a decision for all of us to open. It's just a decision for those of us who are fortunate enough, almost might say privileged enough, to be healthy, to not be vulnerable. Maybe you had the vaccine, or maybe you have caught COVID before, so you have this immunity, although that is becoming less of a security as these variants are rising up. You could recast that again. So the decision for us to reopen necessarily excludes or puts at risk those who are most vulnerable. Yes, we who are healthy have the right to gather together, but doing so either excludes or puts at risk the people who are most vulnerable to this. Now, we're to do everything in love. So what does love look like here? What does cross-like love, other-oriented love, putting the interests of others ahead of your own kind of love, what does it look like for this decision? And for us, it seems to the leadership of Woodland Hills Church anyways, that it's more consistent with cross-like love. For those who are strong, to put the interests of the vulnerable ahead of their own. To sacrifice a right we have to get together for the sake of those who would be excluded or would be put more at risk by that decision. It seems to me that Paul gives an illustration of this in Romans 14. He's talking to the Christians, the congregations in Rome, and he distinguishes between the weak and the strong. He's talking about their conscience. And the issue that they're dividing over is should you eat meat that's offered to idol, and is it okay to drink wine? And some said yes, and Paul calls them the strong. They have strong. Their faith is strong, and they don't get convicted over things like that, but others do. And then Paul says in Romans 14 that you who are strong, don't use your rights, your privileges, your strength, in ways that would cause your brother or sister to stumble, to harm them in any way. Because you're strong, don't make decisions that are going to minimize or ostracize or put at risk, alienate or cause to stumble those who aren't as strong. And so it seems to me that the application of this to our situation here is those of us who maybe are healthy enough to come without much concern at all and gather together, and that would be so wonderful. That'd be one. But to do that, we're excluding folks who can't come and putting others at risk. In some ways, to go ahead with that decision might be communicating, you're not as essential to our community as the rest of us who are gathering here, because we can get by without you. When in fact, as Delon pointed out earlier, that it's in our weakness that God is most glorified. We need every part of the body of Christ. And if anything, Jesus, he tells us in Luke 14 that when you have a gathering, when you're going to have a party, make sure you go out of your way to include those who are never invited to parties. You know, the ostracized of society, the beggars, the poor people, the lame, the lepers, all the rest. Make sure you include those folks. So if anything, we should be going out of our way to include those folks, not going out of our way to make a decision that's going to exclude them or put them at risk. I'll tell you that it's also important to remember that when we talk about folks who are vulnerable, it's not just people with underlying conditions, though it includes them, of course. It's not just senior citizens. It's anyone who's more at risk because of this COVID thing. I don't know if you know this or not, but people of color, they are 2.5 to 3 times more likely to get COVID and die from this COVID virus than our white folks. So the decision for us to open is going to be, the ones who aren't going to be part of that us are going to be a much higher percentage of people of color. And what looks wrong with that picture? For us, it seems like that's not the kind of decision we should be making. That's not the kind of message we want to be sending, and that's not the kind of message we want to be living. And I'll add that I have a personal horse in this race now. I got COVID back in October, and it was nasty. It was not like the flu. It's like no bug I've ever had. I kept on trading in and trading out different symptoms. It was just wild. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I know some people get by without any symptoms whatsoever, but some people get knocked hard. And I'm lucky. I didn't get knocked nearly as hard as a lot of folks get. I didn't spend any time in the hospital. But they have these long haulers, the lingering effects. And lucky me, it just goes into the pattern that I've had in the last year. I am one of those long haulers. I'm sleeping 2 to 3 hours more every 24-hour cycle than I used to sleep. I'm getting 8 hours sleep a night. This is crazy. My whole life I've gotten by in 5, and then I take a little 20-minute nap, and I'm good to go. Now I take 8 hours, and then I take a nap and I sleep for another hour. It's crazy. How do you get anything done? You 8 hours a night, people, you get out of bed, the day's half over. It drives me nuts. I have this wheeziness and the cough that lingers here and there, goes and comes and goes and whatever. And it's not bronchitis or pneumonia or anything. I got my lungs checked out. He just says it's residual COVID crud, and your lungs are still irritated. And so the bottom line is that I have an underlying condition. If I were to get COVID now, especially one of the new variants, I have immunity, I think, to the standard view, although it's not clear that I would have that. It's just more likely. But the variants, the South African virus could get around that, and that is, they say it's accelerating much faster than the run-of-the-mill kind of COVID thing. So I would be at risk, to the point where the leadership, the corporate celebration team that runs the weekend services, they have told me that if that virus is still raging when we decide to open, that I should not be in that crowd. I would be at a higher risk. It knocked me on my butt when I was healthy and got it. What would it be like now that I'm compromised? I don't know. But they are saying that. So I would have to have a pre-recorded message or be off-site. As you leave your homes, so you don't have to watch me on screen, and now come to watch me on screen at the church when I'm preaching. But it's not just me. Paul Eddy also would have to stay away, and we have several other pastors who have got conditions or circumstances that make it unreasonable for them to go in any kind of large gathering. Paul was told that he should avoid crowds like the plague, even if you're, no pun intended. Well, actually, a pun is intended. Avoid it like the plague, because that is the plague, and to stay away from that. So we've always said that the church isn't someplace you go; it's something we are. You don't go to church, be the church. And so this is a great opportunity for us to keep on growing in our being in the church. In some ways, I think that there's so much emphasis on going to church for some Christians that it took the onus off of the being the church. Well, now let's reverse that. Let's keep on growing in our capacity to be the church. Along those lines, I want to say one more thing, and that is, if you are healthy enough so you would go to a gathering that's obeying CDC guidelines, but you don't feel threatened by that because you're healthy, maybe you're younger, or whatever, you're okay with taking reasonable risks. Well, since we're not letting you do that by coming to a weekend service, I encourage you to refocus that. Okay, so I can't do what you could do if you were able to go out there and whatever. And so here's the thing. In the government, they have these essential workers. Everything depends on these people these are essential people. the frontliners. And their job puts them at more risk than the rest of us, but it's just kind of required of their job. And that gets kind of funky when their job gets pretty risky, like it is, for example, with teachers. And we're working through all of that. But if you are a person who is relatively healthy, you don't have underlying conditions, are not more at risk, and are willing to, take that reasonable risk, consider being an essential kingdom worker. Essential kingdom worker. Take the time that maybe you would have, instead of making a decision to take a risk for yourself, make decisions to take risks for the sake of others, because that's consistent with cross-like love. Maybe there's people on your block who need someone to go shopping for them, or need their sidewalk plowed, or you can volunteer in some organizations, or you can, right now there's a big need for blood, okay? So you can spend your time, and a lot of folks stay away from those places because a lot of people congregate there. That's where they gather. But if you're not afraid of that, be one of those who gives blood. Or volunteering at church, or just ask the question, live in the question, and pray over the question, how might God use me in this season here, where we can't gather together, but we are called to be the church. Maybe you're called to be an essential worker in the church. Whatever else you get out of this, this is not the time to coast. This is the time we want to be pressing in on this. Up your game, if anything. And it's like we're playing chess and we've lost our queen. In the normal church, the weekend service is sometimes treated like as the queen. Well, we now can't have the queen, but let's get good at chess and every other piece we can play. I'm playing off the Queen's Gambit, which is a really good movie, by the way, if you want to check that out in this COVID season. It's a surprising movie about chess, but it's really pretty interesting. Okay, one last question, and that is, when will it be safe? When? And my definitive answer is, I don't know. The future's open. Haven't you learned that from me yet? The future's open. It's particularly open right now because a lot will depend on what happens in March and April. There's this fastly spreading African variant and the UK variant and all these other kind of variants that are coming around, and it's a race against the clock to slow down the mutations by getting these vaccinations and all this. So it's kind of an interesting battle we're in now. Some are saying that everyone's saying there's going to be somewhat of a bump up, but some are saying it could be mild, but some are saying, like Dr. Osterholm at the University of Minnesota says that it could be worse than anything we've seen so far. So we're just going to keep our eyes open. And, we'll call it play by play. Be in prayer with us over this. Partner with us so we would have wisdom and discernment to know when is the right time, which is the time that will be consistent with cruciform love, where it will be at least reasonably safe for all of us to get together. Pray that we can discern that. And that our motive for doing that is nothing other than the fact that we want to be concerned for, living for, having an eye for, putting the interests of the vulnerable over those of our own. I will tell you that I know this hurts. I get the frustration of it. I miss church service. I miss it. I miss the energy and the singing together and, just the seeing familiar faces, seeing new faces, the hugs, the questions, the amens, the rowdy folks in the first few rows giving me smack talk. I miss the tap, hanging out with the tap, although we meet on Monday nights on Zoom, but it's not quite the same. I miss all of that, but I'll just say hang in there. I don't know when we're going to reopen. We'll do it as soon as possible when it's safe and consistent with the cross-like love, but until then, let's just keep pressing on the way we're doing here. And thus ends sermon number 1, all right?